Hi there. My name is D.G. Valdron. Welcome to my place of strangeness, my place of oddities and curiosities, of the obscure, the overlooked, the interesting, and sometimes the charming. This is my attic. And today we are going to talk about a couple of books of mine, Axis of Andes and New World War, largely because I'm shameless. I'm a big fan of alternate history. I like alternate history um, because it's about choice. It's about this notion that maybe we could have done something different, maybe that a small change could make large ripples in the world. Often, when we talk about alternate history, we tend to fall into cliches. So it's usually about the Confederacy winning the Civil War or Adolf Hitler winning World War II. But really, there is so much more. Really, what makes it really charming, what makes it interesting, what makes it fascinating to me is the opportunity to dive deep, to research into people's lives, into politics, into little bits of geography or biology or physics, and see just how profound, how uncertain, how full of potential everything is. This is the art form of the butterfly flapping its wings and creating a hurricane somewhere else. Now, World War II is definitely a favorite subject matter, but one of the things I noticed about World War II is that, it leaves South America out completely. Now, there's a little bit of South America involvement in World War II. For instance, in the north part of South America, Colombia ends up sinking a German Nazi submarine. And then further down in the southern cone, a German warship, the Graf Spee, ends up taking refuge in Uruguay before it goes out and is sunk. During World War II, most of the countries are neutral, but Argentina and Chile are very Nazi sympathetic. On the other hand, Brazil ends up declaring war against the Nazis, but not actually doing very much with that. But what if World War II came to South America in a very serious way? A way that rewrote the whole map, the way it rewrote the maps of Europe and Asia. How could that happen? Well, interestingly, there actually was a war in 1940 or 41 taking place in South America between Ecuador and Peru. Now, as wars go, this is not great shakes. The war lasted only a month. It was a bloody little affair. About 1,000 people were killed. But the most significant thing about this war is that Ecuador lost 40% of its territory to Peru. Literally, the country was just gutted. Most of that territory, of course, was the interior part, which was largely empty. But still, the map changed. All right. Now that's an interesting thing. What if this war had gone bigger? What if this war had gone very bad? Well, if you actually look at the details of what happened between Ecuador and Peru at that time, what was going on with Ecuador was that it was a very unstable country. Between 1930 and 1941, when the war happened, they had literally a dozen changes of government. It was like a revolving door. There were people coming in, there were people coming out, there were elections were overthrown, people would get impeached, people would refuse to be seated. It was just chaos. And this is in the teeth of the Depression, where you actually need leadership. And instead you had like a three-ring circus. Ecuador was suffering badly during the Depression, and the governments were just changing and changing constantly. It was so unstable, as a matter of fact, that when the Ecuador-Peru War happened, the president of Ecuador refused to allow his troops to participate in the war. He kept them in Quito, the capital city, because he was more afraid of being overthrown by his own people than he was of the invaders. And, that's the end of that story. But what if things turned out differently? So, for instance, what if in 1931, following the election of Neptali Boniface, he actually takes office. Now, here's a kind of interesting historical thing. In 1930, there was an overthrow of the government. Leading out of that was an election held in 1931 where an old fellow named Neptali Boniface was leading a group called the Dirty Shirts. It was a fascist group, but Boniface was basically, old school landowner. Anyway, the election was won handily. Boniface basically bet his rivals 2-1, something like that. It was an overwhelming victory. But the Ecuadorian parliament refused to allow him to take office. This resulted in a minor little civil war. He lost, and as a result, Ecuador began its long career of basically revolving door governments and complete futility in the face of both the Depression and later on of Peru. But what if things turned out differently? Supposing that Boniface wins his little civil war. And so for the next 10 years, Ecuador has a stable, functional government. Now, it's the Depression. Things are going to be very terrible, no matter what. But if you have a stable government, things are going to be a little bit better. The state will be a little bit more functional and viable. So, what happens? Well, the Ecuadorians, assuming that they've got a stable government, are not fools. They know the war is coming. It's been established by about 1930 as a result of a treaty between Colombia and Peru that Ecuador is now on the hot seat. So the war is definitely, potentially there. It's coming. The Ecuadorians can see it. And what do? Well, if they have a stable government, they're not only going to be inclined to defend themselves, but they're probably going to be very motivated to do so, and they will probably actually be able to go about this in some way. Now, the problem for Ecuador is it's a small little country. It's this little postage stamp area right here. And that means that they are severely outnumbered and outgunned by Peru. So with 10 years to prepare, what do? Well, they arm up, they build up their militias, they build up their armies, they try and buy weapons. But there's got to be something more because, they're very much outmatched. So they start looking for alliances. They reach out to Chile, to Bolivia, to Colombia, to Argentina, to Peru, to Brazil, to anybody that they think can offset Peru. And of course, that sends Peru out looking for its own alliances. And so a country that is normally a basket case leads to a continent becoming an armed camp. And it's still not enough. Okay? So what do when you've got your alliances and you've got your army, but you're still outgunned, and you're a fascist? Well, you go to Europe and you ask for a meeting with Adolf Hitler and you ask for help, and Hitler says yes. And that, my friends, is how Axis of Andes starts off. And so the war starts up, but this time, instead of a month-long little walkover, it turns into a real fight. And as the fight goes on and escalates, it spreads from Ecuador to Peru, and then from Peru to Chile, from Chile and Peru to Bolivia, and then to Argentina, and so forth, until the whole continent is overrun with wars and campaigns and stuff. And that makes, I think, for an interesting read and a bit of research. Now, I've got to warn you, this is actually written as a history book. The characters themselves are not people, but countries. The story that we hear is one of economics, it is one of demographics, It is one of colonialism and ambitions and national leaders who are doing the best they can, but making a succession of very bad decisions. There are narrative bits where we get to follow individual people, but this is a story of a continent. This is a story of nations. And this is also a story of human folly, with a guest appearance by Adolf Hitler, so how can you go wrong? Anyway, give it a shot. Oh, and by the way, feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. I will do my very best to try and, post entertaining YouTube videos that might be a little bit different.